creativity only exists on a foundation of basic skills. When we get better at something, that we start to like doing the thing.
How has writing become so far from what it used to be? How have we gone from the works of Charles Dickens and Jane Austen to the works of Stephen King and Robin DiAngelo? How have people become so stupid in today's culture? Writing is the bedrock of society, whether you think so or not. Aside from novels, newspapers, and articles, writing is everywhere you look. As you are walking down the street, you see a sign advertising a new model of Nike shoes, which has writing on it. As you are standing in line at a bakery waiting to order, you look at the menu to determine whether you want a croissant or a pretzel. Without writing, life would not be the way it is today. According to Lightspeed Tech, the average human sees 20,000 to 30,000 words per day. Think about this. Without writing, what would a novel be? How would you convey the feelings and emotions if we didn't have words to describe a certain thing? If we didn't have writing, how would you tell between the movie Gladiator and Frozen despite the fact that they look different? Now, hopefully, I have proved my point that writing is everywhere and essential for day-to-day life. So back to my earlier question, how do we get from Charles Dickens and Jane Austen to Stephen King and Robin DiAngelo? And how has culture, in a way, become so stupid and lazy? In Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, he wrote, quote, "I am as light as a feather. I am as happy as an angel. I am as merry as a schoolboy. I am as giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everybody. A Happy New Year to all the world. Hello here. Whoop, hello." End quote. Stephen King, on the other hand, once said, quote, "I am the literary equivalent of a Big Mac and fries." End quote. Well, I guess that explains why people have a heart attack trying to read his scribbles. So once again, I ask, how did we get from such beautiful literature to not beautiful literature? How did we get from books about venturing across the depths of Mordor to destroy the One Ring to books about, quote, how to decenter your whiteness, whatever that is supposed to mean? Honestly, I cannot give a fulfilling answer to both of these questions, how society is now stupid and lazy, and how we ventured from great literature to not great literature. I may end up just giving you the Sunday school answer and say sin. But I do know someone who can help us uncover this more and dive deeper into it. My guest on Creator Corner today is Andrew Pudewa. Andrew Pudewa is most well known for being the founder of the Institute for Excellence in Writing, or IEW for short. But he is also a speaker and educator, professional joke teller, which we will get to, and proud grandpa. I am super excited to be having this interview. For high school, my writing and grammar was IEW structure and style, as well as fix-it grammar. I have learned a whole lot from Mr. Pudewa, and he has shaped the way I write today. I have a lot of respect for Mr. Pudewa, and as I've learned more about him as a person, that respect has just grown immensely. In today's episode of Creator Corner, me and Mr. Pudewa will be discussing writing, storytelling, and answering the two big questions: what happened to the way we write and the way people are today. So please welcome Andrew Pudewa, the founder of IEW, to this episode of Creator Corner. Andrew Pudewa, thank you so much for joining me on Creator Corner.
It is a pleasure to be with you, Elijah.
So, obviously, I'm a huge fan of yours. I took IEW for, I believe it was 2 years after my parents found it out, and I just absolutely loved it and have loved writing since then. So, why don't we start off with a bit of your background and how you came to start IEW?
Sure. Yeah. Well, my professional training is actually not in English or writing. I am, by primary profession, a violin teacher. And so I grew up playing the violin. I went to school in Japan, studied with Dr. Shinichi Suzuki, came back to the States after 3 years in Japan, and worked full-time teaching violin, Suzuki, music classes. And I will be quite honest, it is a hard way to support a family. So I was always looking for some kind of side gig, something I could do to just bring in a little more money so I could afford to be a violin teacher, which I love doing. But I accidentally stumbled into a group of people in Canada who were teaching this thing called blended structure and style in composition. And I took this 10-day teacher training course up there, and I just loved it. And I thought to myself, this is a Suzuki method for teaching writing. This is a way to use modeling and repetition and gradually increasing levels of complexity to develop skill very similarly to the way I had been teaching violin. So I started teaching writing classes just on the side to, my oldest two kids at the time and some of their friends, just to, another little thing I could do to bring in a few dollars. And then I got the idea that maybe I could teach some teachers how to teach this. And so I created a little seminar, and this was back in fall of 1994. And I got 20 people to pay $40 to listen to me talk for a whole day. And that was like a whole week's salary of teaching violin back then. And I was very happy, and I thought I could do this. And I ended up going to Canada, meeting the same group of Canadian teachers every summer for many years. And I started IEW kind of officially in 95, but I went full-time in 99. And at that point, I was running around teaching writing seminars. I'd done a couple kid weeks. I had created some videotapes, not very good quality, but I had made them. Mm-hmm. And so by 99, I was actually making more money on the side doing writing courses than I was working full time teaching music. So I thought, okay, maybe this is the way to go. And so we moved from where we were in Idaho to California. And then I went full time in the year 2000 with IEW, got my first help other than my kids, who were always slave labor. But I got my first employee about a year and a half after that, and it's just been continually expanding since then. Really not because of my particular brilliance. I learned this from other people, but I got kind of good at, I guess, teaching it, and I liked it, and that's how it all came into being. Desperation is the mother of ingenuity.
Yeah. So what exactly is maybe like the tagline or goal of IEW? Because obviously, when I was taking it, there was multiple different things, like want you to learn to love writing and write well and stuff like that. But if you could give like one goal and one slogan of IEW, what would that be?
Well, what we do is equip teachers and parents with methods and materials to help cultivate the arts of language, which are listening, speaking, reading, writing, and as the natural extension of all that, better thinking. So that's kind of how we would, elevator speech what we do. We began, of course, in the homeschool world because we were homeschooling our family, and I had contacts, and I got invited to some conventions and started doing some larger audiences. And then that expanded into schools, mostly charter schools, Christian, Catholic, private, classical schools, special ed. We've done a lot of work with special ed departments because, they've got problems that they need to solve, and we had some good solutions. Mm-hmm. So what I've really come to understand and enjoy teaching about is the deep interconnectedness between those arts of language, that listening is really at the core of everything that's ever going to happen. I mean, when you think about it, a child is very unlikely, if it's not impossible, for them to say a word that they haven't heard. Right? Mm-hmm. So our spoken vocabulary is very much a function of the auditory input that we have. And that's entirely true with young children. And it continues to be true. And at a certain point, we are old enough to maybe read words we've never heard and then attempt to use them in writing or speaking. But in the whole developmental period from when kids kind of start to, read and write on paper until well into the teenage years, listening is really at the foundation of all those language arts. So listening and then speaking, same kind of idea. Children aren't likely to ever try and say a word. They're not likely to ever try to write a word that they're not comfortable speaking. So their written vocabulary is very dependent on their speaking vocabulary, which is very dependent on their listening vocabulary. Mm-hmm. And then reading also is a function of listening because, what's a kid trying to do when they read? They're looking at letters, they're trying to sound out the word, use word attack skills, depend on their memory of symbolic connections with meaning. And so they may see a word, be able to sound it out, but if they don't know the word already, they really don't know what it means. So they can't really read it with comprehension. So more and more, I've been focusing on helping people understand that developmentally, that listening and speaking is really, it's at the core of improved reading and writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so obviously I want to get into, a couple things in regards to homeschooling, but if people were to start with IW, because you've got these different levels of structure and style and then fix-it grammar, where should people get started in regards to IEW?
Well, there's a couple of different pathways. I still feel that the very best thing, if you want the long-term best possible result, you start with yourself. And so whether you are a homeschool parent or a tutor or a teacher in a school, if you want to be able to teach a curriculum, you want to know it well. You want to have intimately experienced it and wrestled with it a little bit. So our flagship product, Teaching Writing Structure and Style, is what I first created in 1995. And it's been the main thing we've done ever since then for 25 years, which is teaching you, the adult, how to use our system of structural models and stylistic techniques and invention methods so that you can then teach it to children of all different ages and aptitudes. And because it's a system, we pretty much teach the same thing to everyone, whether they're in second grade or graduate school, right? It's a system. And so everybody starts, and you remember, the keyword outline where you read the source text and choose the keywords, copy them into your outline, finish that, tell it back verbally, and then rewrite that content. And so we start everybody with this very simple but powerful idea of using keywords to move and organize thoughts. Then, of course, once you've learned the system, you have basically three options. The first option was the only option people had for many years when I was starting, which is, the system, now you go design your own lessons. Get your own source text, create your own checklists, make your own schedule, figure it out. I just taught you how to do that, so you should be able to. But of course, as well as I do, having intersected with the busy, busy world of homeschool moms, especially if they've got, a decent number of kids, that's time they may not have. And so there was this impediment to them being able to implement the system well. And so we started to create some books, some theme-based writing lesson books. We started with ancient history and U.S. history and medieval history. We've since expanded out and have a number of these titles. And so this is doing all that prep work for the teacher, for the mom. Here's the source text. This is what unit it goes with. Here's how you make a keyword outline from this source text. Here's the things that you want to teach. Here's the style checklist and some practice exercises so that you can practice a little bit on getting, you remember the ly adverb, the who, which clause, the strong verb, that stuff. So the theme-based writing lesson books are really have been very, very helpful to get teachers and parents going without the impediment of having to have a lot of time to figure out what to do Monday morning. Then we supplemented that with some video of me teaching students. For about 15 years, we had a course called the Student Writing Intensive, and it was just a few videos of me teaching some different aspects of that program to students. I don't know if you ever saw, it would have been a much younger version of me on those videos.
I remember all the structure and style videos, definitely.
Yeah. And then in around 2018, we began the process, a multi-year process of creating a much better quality of student video, which we now call Structure and Style for Students. We have 7 years total of those videos with some advanced video. We have our beautiful little studio here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we brought in live kids, and I told jokes and walked them through the whole thing. We did 3 classes every Tuesday, 24 weeks for 2.5 years. So about 168 classes, I believe, if you add them all up, which is a lot of video classes. So now people can, either choose, do the teacher training course, use theme-based books, design own lessons, or just grab one of our packages and start doing that with their kids right now. And we've been getting super, very, very good results with that.
So with these, with the video versions now of you teaching the students, I remember, it'd be like lunchtime or after lunchtime, we pull it up on the computer, follow along with Binder. With that, has IW turned into more of, hey, every Tuesday or so you can come and take a writing class, or did y'all say we create the videos, but then we're just going to send out resources, instead of maybe some of the kids in, Oklahoma can come every Tuesday for their writing class?
Well, when we were recording those videos for the 3 years we were doing that, we did bring in kids, and they were half actors, half students. They knew that they had to be on good behavior because everything was on camera. And if they said something dumb, we're going to retake the thing. And it was fun because I kind of developed a rapport with these kids, and we were in this project together, and they knew that they had, not just the job of being attentive and doing the homework, but they also had to be sensitive to the fact that we're trying to create a legacy product. And so we did that, and then COVID kind of disrupted the whole thing there for a while. And we really don't teach classes here. I don't teach public classes anymore, but we do have groups all over the country that the kids will come in, once a week and do a class together, and there will be a teacher who will be on hand to answer questions that the video doesn't answer. And the big thing is, dealing with the kids' papers, because, they're writing papers, and you got couple dozen kids, and you've got to do something with all this, like give them some feedback, mark them, give them a grade, whatever you want to do. And then as far as what we do at IEW, we do have, I think about 15 people who teach online classes, and we use the flipped class format. So the students watch the video of me before they have the class. So they watch me, they do whatever happens in the class, then they meet with the online teacher and the group of kids that's with them. The teacher continues to ask questions, do a little practice, do the fix-it grammar with them, and then they write the paper and email it in to the teacher. So we combine the online personalized interaction format with the video format, and that has worked fantastically well.
So obviously, IEW has become a huge part of homeschooling, and a lot of people now, because they don't want to send their kids to public school, even some people don't want to send them to like a classical Christian school, so they're homeschooling them. And I've heard some people say, well, I want to homeschool my kid in a way where, teaching them through activities and not giving them homework. So whether it's like, we're going to pick up the yard and we're going to teach them like, this rock and plus this rock equals 2 rocks and stuff like that. And in a way, I'm like, absolutely. But what do you think about that? Because, I think, teaching through activities and not by homework in a certain sense is, good. But then say that kid goes on to, college or whatever that may be, and they're totally unprepared for all the homework they're getting.
Yeah, well, there's 2 ways to think about that. The first one is when you're homeschooled, everything is homework because you're always home.
Yeah.
So, this, it's just a different context. Like, a lot of people that I know, my kids who homeschool their kids, it isn't as though we begin at a certain time and end at a certain time. We're just doing stuff together all day long. I think one of the most important things that people who homeschool are discovering is that all kids do learn at a different speed. Some need more repetition, more practice, more coaching, more help. Others, probably like you, are the ones who say, okay, I got it. Leave me alone. Let me do this. But when you come to this idea of activities, I think it's very helpful to divide things. Although they're integrated for purposes of analysis, it's helpful to divide them into 2 categories: knowledge and skills. And then you could say there's a third category there, which would be character. And that's kind of an intangible that affects everything. But knowledge, for the most part, are things like, history, science, literature. Stuff. You learned it somehow. Maybe you read a textbook. Maybe you went to the museum. Maybe your mom did a kitchen science thing and you were doing hands-on, but you're knowing facts, and those facts combine into concepts, and those concepts can be applicable in different ways. Skills, however, are a little bit different in that a skill is something you have to do in order to improve, right? I could maybe write a book or make a video on how to play the violin, but that doesn't mean everyone who read the book or watched the video would be able to play the violin, right? Do you play a musical instrument yourself?
I do play guitar, yes.
Yeah, so how do you learn to play the guitar?
By practicing.
Yeah, by doing it. If you don't do it, you're not going to be able to do it. And so there's, I think, very strong analogies between the skills of writing and music, which a lot of people have experience with. And then you could include things like sports or dance, right? You have to do it and do it again and do it again. And what you need is coached feedback, right? So if you go to a music teacher, they say, here, do this, and you do it. And then they say, okay, you did that part good, but if you want to get better, you have to change the way you're doing this thing. Or, that's great. Now here's the next level of complexity, which you would be ready to try. And so it's a graded progression with coached feedback. And that's true. And, anyone who learns a sport knows that's what you have to do, whether it's martial arts or basketball. And then, of course, other things like art, right? You can't just read a book on how to draw and draw well. You have to try something and hopefully get some feedback, give yourself some critical feedback if you're mature enough to do so. So that's why the whole idea of homework, I would not put in the same category as being different than hands-on when it comes to skills development. Because if you're sitting there trying to write something, you are practicing, and there's no option. Now, someone could sit with you and encourage you, and that looks a little bit more hands-on and engaged. As I said, some kids, they need a lot of hand-holding, and that's how they learn best. Other kids are much happier to have a little more freedom of experimentation and then bring it to you and you give them some feedback. Or some kids don't want any of your feedback. I'm just going to do what I do, and I don't care what you think. But that's not the way to develop the higher level of skills. That's why learning does require humility to some degree, which is, I want to learn something from you.
Yeah. And so kind of jumping off that, a bit of a lot of kids in today's culture seem, very lazy. Like, I was taking a English class at a local community college, and one of the kids, we were, proofreading each other's papers, and I was like, "This is really bad. You spelled so many things wrong. Like, this part doesn't even make sense. Like, there's zero like paragraph, indents and stuff." And he was like, "Oh, it's okay. I'm still gonna submit it, even though it failed me the last time." I'm like, interesting. So where do you think that this decline per se of, because we look at, we read about the older times and how kids, were more diligent in school and like all of that stuff. Where do you think this decline took place?
That is a big question. Well, if anyone who's listening to us wanted to understand that more fully, there are some books that would help. I would recommend. One of them is called An Underground History of American Education by John Taylor Gatto. Mr. Gatto was a 8th grade English teacher in Brooklyn, New York for 16 years. He was the New York City Teacher of the Year, New York State Teacher of the Year. And he kind of very clearly in that book, with citing primary resources and everything, showed the shift from how education was from, say, really hundreds of years before, but the shift began in the late 18 and early 1900s, and then just continued throughout the 20th century. And the shift really was from the idea of education being something that was directed toward helping students develop their language skills, their math skills, their thinking skills, their literacy, their general knowledge in a way that would connect them with the whole tradition of Western civilization in a way. And people today might call that classical education, right?
Mhm.
If you've heard that term. And what happened in the late 18 and early 1900s was there was a shift into an industrial mode of education. And rather than cultivating individual talents, individual aptitudes, individual challenges with a standard of excellence, there became a standardization that occurred. And that's when we got classrooms with grade levels and age segregation and letter grades on papers and percentage scores, and this whole system that was essentially designed to do the same thing to everyone in the same way to get the same result. And that was an industrial model, and its goal was to standardize education so that everybody would then be kind of the same. And this works very well for an industrial society. So if you teach kids the same way, according to the same schedule, in a group to get the same result, that's really good if what you want is people to be predictable, controllable, obedient factory workers, voters, and consumers who will do and buy and vote exactly what you tell them to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then you give them a couple false choices, Pepsi or Coke, Republican or Democrat, and they think they have freedom, but they've been forced into a very narrow knowledge-based, skills-based, and so we've seen that in the whole 20th century. Education in America, and we exported it to most of the other developed countries as well, has been increasingly narrow. The other thing that has happened is that when you age segregate children, what happens is you are forced to kind of compromise and teach to the middle of the group, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a bunch of kids who are all 12 years old, right? They are not the same because they all have different neurology. They have all different home environments. They have different genetics. They have different environmental influences. Everything about them is different, but now you're going to pretend that they're all going to learn the same thing in the same way according to the same schedule. Mm-hmm. That is absolutely a recipe for failure. What is the failure? Well, the kids who have a higher aptitude can learn faster and easier. They get bored really fast. And I will tell you, the most problematic thing for a teacher is a bored 12-year-old in a classroom, or several bored 12-year-olds, because they will start to make problems for you because they're bored and they need something to do. On the other hand, you've got the kids who aren't developing their reading skills. Maybe they've got a dyslexia, dysgraphia, attention deficit problem, an auditory processing issue. They're just not tracking with you. So they're not able to keep up with everybody else. So you're kind of forced to always say, okay, I got this, hopefully a majority of kids in the middle who I can do everything with in the same way at the same time according to the same schedule. And then I have to jump around and figure out how to keep these kids busy doing something so they don't, wipe out the harmony and civility of my classroom. And on the other hand, you got these kids, well, what they need is remediation. So we're going to try to, teach them what they should have already learned and already been able to do, while we're still teaching them what they should be learning according to the group we're in. Mm-hmm. So compare this, if you will, to, say, the one-room schoolhouse of the 1800s. You might have 40 kids. The ages are from maybe 6 to 16. Everybody's working at their own pace in different subjects, making progress, kind of like a homeschool, only with a whole bunch of them. But that idea that everyone can work at their own pace. So that was the big shift from kind of the classical education, content-based, reading, writing, and arithmetic are the skills you need. So that's where we put the priority. And everyone can develop those at their own speed. And it's okay if you are going faster, or slower than somebody else. To now, everybody has to do exactly what we say according to this schedule. And if you don't fit that mold, we're going to figure out some way to force you into it. And combine that with the modern philosophy of education, where creativity is more important than basic skills. And then what happens is you neglect the basic skills. So if writing is all about, and this is my area, writing, if writing is all about, well, learn to express yourself on paper. It's all an individual thing. Just be creative, be unique, experiment, and do all that stuff that sounds really good. If you don't have a foundation of basic skills, such as you mentioned, spelling, such as how to actually write words on paper, such as grammar, knowing which combinations of words actually make sense and which don't, mm-hmm. and practicing that. I always like to use the analogy of piano. If we had taught music in this country the way we've taught writing for the past 70, 80 years, it would kind of go like this. Come on into my studio. Here's the piano. I'll teach you all the names of the notes and how to push the keys and the pedals. But there is one little rule here. You have to kind of just make everything up as you go. Just improvise. Just fool around at the piano for half an hour a day and do that for 5 years, and you'll learn how to play the piano. Well, there's some truth to that, mm-hmm. but you wouldn't play very well. I think we all can understand that. Mm-hmm. What do we do in music? We say, play this piece, do it in this way, practice it as much as you need to until you've mastered it, then play the next piece and practice this in this way and develop the skills at your own pace, but solid, and then move up in complexity. Do that for 5 years. Now we could actually talk about the creative side of improvisation or interpretation or composition. So the main thing I would try to summarize all that is to say that creativity only exists on a foundation of basic skills. And then you hit the 2000s, and we've just seen the most phenomenal decline of education anywhere in the world. I mean, if education was a business, it would have gone bankrupt a long, long time ago, because no one should pay for the inferior product that most schools are producing. Education is not a business, it's a government monopoly. And so people are just forced to take the kids, like your colleague there in the class you took. He's there, he graduated high school, he still can't write a sentence or a paragraph that does anything useful, and the teachers are just forced to deal with it. And then the frightening thing is that all these 20-somethings right now are going to be populating the workforce in mass in the next 10 to 20 years. And, I guess the alternative is to say, well, thank heavens we have AI that's going to be able to write decently well, because none of the high school or college graduates have ever learned to do it.
Yeah.
That, of course, is a different subject. Does that all make sense to you?
Yeah. So obviously we want to bring, back, we don't want to essentially go back in time, because if we go back in time, that's how we got to this point in time. But how do we bring back these people into being able to write well and enjoy writing without being, kind of like a high strung person, like do this, do that, do that, that. And if you're just, so nitpicky, then they're just going to learn to hate it. So how exactly should we go about bringing that back?
Well, I might challenge your premise, or at least the way you said it, a little bit. I have never had as a goal, I have never taught anyone to have as a goal, I have never written anything that would suggest that we should have a goal for children to like writing.
Mm-hmm.
It's the wrong goal. It might be a byproduct, and that would be okay. And we're happy if it happens. But I will be quite honest with you, Elijah. I personally do not like writing. I find it hard.
Mm-hmm.
I procrastinate. I never would sit there and say, I feel like I want to write something for fun. Mm-hmm. That would just never occur to me. Now, I've met people who do that, but I don't relate to it. Now, I do like having written something. I like the being able to get the product and to be happy with it. And I will labor over that product, but I don't enjoy the process of getting there.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's one thing. Now, the second thing is to use some common sense here. What do you like doing yourself personally?
I like, playing guitar, doing video stuff.
You like playing guitar, you like doing video stuff.
Yep.
Why?
I enjoy writing too.
Why? Well, I would argue the reason that you like what you like is because you're decently good at it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you're decently good at something, you tend to like it. I, for example, like cooking. Why? Because I think I'm decently good at it.
Mm-hmm.
And I like eating. And I would rather eat what I cook than what somebody else cooks. Okay. I like teaching. Why? I feel like I'm decently good at it. I very intensely dislike playing basketball. Why? I am not good at it.
Yeah.
I am bad at playing. I really abhor the idea of skiing. Why? Because the last time I went skiing was such a dreadful, horrible, miserable, painful, embarrassing, cold, fill in the bleep bleep adjective experience, right? I don't want to do it again. Now, is it possible that somehow I could learn to like skiing? Maybe, but it wouldn't be by someone trying to convince me that it's fun. The only way was if I was in a situation and I could learn something and get a little bit better and feel like I had made progress. It's when we get better at something that we start to like doing the thing. Does that all make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't want people to ever say to their kids, or say to me, I just want my son to like writing or enjoy it. I don't care. I want him to do it. And I happen to know for a fact that if you teach him in a certain way, he will be able to do it a little bit better a month from now than now. and a little bit better than that a month later, and significantly better a year later. And then you will discover that that child who previously hated writing, who's now getting better, believes that it's getting better, is experiencing that improvement. Now he'll say stuff like, I like doing this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's kind of my philosophy. And I'm not interested in cheerleading kids into thinking they like something. It never, ever works. I'm interested in physically helping them get better at something. And sometimes I will confess that requires you to require something of them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you know, I'm into weightlifting and personal training right now. My son is a personal trainer. Well, you know, you could just go to the gym and do stuff and have no idea what you were doing and say, oh, I'm tired, and leave in 20 minutes. What are you going to accomplish? You can do that for a year and you might get a little bit stronger. But if you have someone who knows what you should do and helps you do it in the right way and then challenges you to go a little bit further, then you go home and wake up sore the next morning. But the next time you go to the gym, it's a little easier, or you can push a little more weight around. The analogies are endless here, because that's what life is about. Life is about having to do stuff you don't want to do, getting help to be able to do it better, and then improving, and then rolling forward on that momentum of improvement, but always being humble enough to ask for more help, for more guidance, for more direction, for more coaching. And, you know, any kid who's on a high school sports team, they'll look at the toughest coach as the best coach.
Yeah. So, kind of, as we talked about, you know, like the decline in education and such, you know, to use an example, you know, back in the old days, we had, you know, books like, Christmas Carol and Charles Dickens and Jane Austen. But now we have people like Stephen King and people writing about like white fragility. So do you think when that decline of education happened, do you think that's when, you know, the writing of books and the context of books started declining? You know, because everyone's like, oh, we're evolving, where it's like, if you look at the history, like we're de-evolving, we're not becoming better. So do you think maybe that the decline in good books came when education declined, or where do you think that exactly happened?
I think the decline of the quality of books that are being published and consumed corresponds with two social phenomenon that kind of did happen in parallel. One was the decline of education towards practicality. Like, why read that? You're never going to have to read that in your job. Why not read something that's more like what you're going to have to read? We saw this with the Common Core State Standards Initiative. I don't know if you're old enough to remember that, but it was around 2005, if my memory serves. I'm not sure. And, you know, the whole nation got a committee of people and said, we're going to create standards for education that every state can adopt, and this is going to improve education nationwide. And as a part of those Common Core state standards, they began to remove what you might call classic literature or traditional or great books and replace it with functional reading. So is it more important for a kid to be able to read a Dickens novel, or to be able to read the instructions on how to put something together, to be able to understand a technical manual in a particular field? So there's this big shift in the early to mid O's toward functional, practical, reading for utility's sake. And so that was a shift pedagogically. Another thing that happened, and this began probably around my childhood in the 60s and 70s, but it really accelerated with the onset of the internet in the 90s and O's, was the shift from paper to screen, right? So I was pretty much one of the first television kid generation people, right? I could watch TV reruns in the afternoon after school, after I did my chores and homework. I would watch, cartoons on Saturday morning. My parents, we'd watch an hour or two of television at night. So I was infected by this television culture, but not badly, because my parents, both decently well educated, both valuing literature and traditional education, they compensated for that in my home environment. Shift another generation forward, kids grew up in the 80s and 90s. Here, you had a lot more cases of both parents working, a lot more abdication. Well, they'll teach it in the schools. The teachers are dealing with their, age-segregated classrooms where they can't actually get everybody to read the same book at the same time because they don't have the skills, or they're bored to death. And then you saw a decline of reading skills happening during that period, right? That 90s and the 80s and 90s. And then you get into the O's, and now you're not limited by what's available on television. You can watch almost anything at any time. And so most people's primary mode of getting information shifted from paper to a screen. I remember growing up reading, as a 12-year-old kid, reading the newspaper that came to our home every day. And I would read the headlines, and I would look and see what looked interesting. I would read the opinion page. They'd have some question. There'd be a, for and against, and it would be a debate on paper in the newspaper, written at a level of language that could do justice to the complexity of the idea, right? But now what we see is that many people don't have the vocabulary. They can't understand complex sentences to the point where that works for them anymore. So what do we have to have? We have to have soundbite news and soundbite opinion. And now with the internet, you don't have to have any qualifications to go have an opinion about anything at all. So you have a bunch of people who are basically ignorant of world history and current events, getting opinions about history and events from people who also are ignorant about history and events. And so you just have this collapsing intellectual environment, and that is where most kids are today. Now, I want to say one thing about most teachers that I've met. They are working really hard to bring the best that they possibly can bring to their students. But the students are coming to them at such a much lower level in terms of attention, in terms of vocabulary, in terms of motivation. Everything is so much harder for the teachers. It's hard to fault them entirely, and sometimes it's hard to fault them at all, because I know teachers out there doing their absolute best, but they can't do in the classrooms what was being done 100 years ago. And we could throw onto that the problem of discipline, and that opens up a whole new can of words. When I was a kid, and certainly when my father was a kid, right, early to mid 1900s, if the teacher said to the student, "You do that again, I will call your parents," that was threat enough for you to change your behavior, because you did not want the teacher calling your parent. Now, it's almost reversed. Kids are saying to teachers, if you say that again, if you do that again, anything I don't like about what you do, I'm calling my parents and they'll complain about you to the school. So it's a complete reversal. And you look at some cities, have such a high teacher turnover rate. Like, I think if I'm correct, and I don't know if this is absolutely current, but at one point, middle school teachers in Oklahoma City, the turnover rate, 60%. 60% of the teachers weren't sticking around for another year. And the most commonly cited reason for that wasn't pay. It was they have no authority to discipline the kids in any effective ways. And the kids are just running all over them. I wouldn't stay in the job. Would you?
Yeah. So
it's very tragic, very sad. But we should get to, where's the hope in all this?
Yeah. So where's the hope? Because, obviously, in a way we want to revive it and bring it back to something good. But now everyone looks at the schools and, we don't hear in the news or whatever it is, we don't hear about the good teachers and the good schools. All we hear about is the bad ones and, all the bad apples. So everyone's like, well, I'm taking my kid out of school. I'm not sending them to school. I'm going to homeschool them because I hear all these horror stories. And, in a sense that, like, I'm fully in favor of that. I was homeschooled my entire life. So where is the hope in that? And what do you think, teachers and parents should start doing?
Yeah. So number one, of course, home education has expanded hugely in your lifetime, right? Mm-hmm. I'm guessing you're somewhere around 20 years old, maybe. But
I'm 17.
If you look, 17. Okay. Well, if you look at the last 20 years, homeschooling has grown very, very rapidly, especially in certain demographics. And we see a whole lot more support for homeschoolers, right? So when we started homeschooling 35 years ago, there wasn't a lot out there. It was a few publishers, and maybe if you're lucky, you live in a place that had a homeschool group, and maybe you had a little co-op, but it was, everybody kind of on their own to figure stuff out. And, you'd go to a convention once a year, and then you'd hear speakers and get inspired and maybe see a new curriculum thing. But now, of course, we've got online classes. We've got resources for parents out the wazoo. We have got all these experienced homeschool moms who've now all written books and have podcasts and, blogs. And so the new homeschool mom today has a support network that is hugely better than what existed 2 to 3 decades ago. That's one difference. Another difference is that the acceptability toward alternative education has changed a lot. So, it's kind of like almost everyone knows someone who homeschools. It's not that weird anymore. And so that just brings more people kind of in. And when you've got more people, you've got more community. When you've got more community, you can have some problems, but you also have generally more growth because you can all help each other. And there are some very large networks of homeschoolers. You may be familiar with, say, Classical Conversations, that has a full-out curriculum and a pattern and a community way of doing things. And those people are very happy, and they're able to accomplish, I think, a lot more than, say, the average homeschool mom of 30 years ago, just in terms of the quality of what they're able to do. There's a huge revival in the classical education world. So people saying, yeah, let's not do everything on screens. Let's read and write and do math on paper. Let's look and say, what were people doing 100 years ago when the typical 8th grader could answer, an 8th grade graduation exam that is beyond your capability or my capability to pass that test today. In fact, if you want a funny experience, Elijah, Google up Salina, Kansas. I think it was 1895 8th grade graduation exam. And you can see the kind of mastery of knowledge and skills that was required just to pass 8th grade 125, 130 years ago. So there's a revival in classical education. Well, let's read good and great books. Let's learn from primary sources. Let's not just have a textbook that filters everything and tells you exactly what to think. Let's let's study grammar. Let's study logic so we can actually have some critical thinking. Critical thinking is a big buzzword in the world of education, but most schools they can't teach that because they haven't addressed the problems of logic, of just basic logic skills. That was a subject that everybody took at one time. Now I think you'd be hard pressed to go to any high school anywhere and find, the course including formal logic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or even informal logic. Rhetoric, so the grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Calculators, are ubiquitous. In fact, it's very likely that you could go into a middle school almost anywhere and find most of the kids can't do a single math problem of any sort without a calculator. Whereas, we sent people into space before there were calculators. They used slide rules and their brains,
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a classical renewal that is giving people a lot of hope. And then the third thing is there's been this reaction against, the increasingly the decline of quality in public schools has put more pressure on alternatives. The biggest one would be charter schools. Charter schools are publicly funded institutions, but they write their own charter so they can do what they want to do and choose their own curriculum and hire their own teachers. There's a huge, huge growth in charter schools, particularly classical charter schools all over the country.
Yeah.
That's very exciting. We are a part of that in a big way. And then we've got the hybrid school phenomenon, which is, okay, we don't want to do that 5-day-week public school because of various problems that we perceive, whether it's safety or quality of education or social environment or whatever. But we need help. So what do we have? 2-day-a-week schools, 3-day-a-week schools. Those are called hybrids. Micro schools. There's a national micro schooling organization, which is essentially where someone says, I'm going to start a school with 12 kids in my home. Okay, well, give me your 12 kids. And it's really going back to the one-room schoolhouse idea that was so successful for so long in rural America in the 1800s. Pod schools. Okay, we got 5 families. We want to essentially school our kids together. So we're going to create a pod and everyone's going to participate like a mini co-op, but much more structured in terms of we're going to cover all the core subjects. There's a lot of homeschool co-ops are, you do your core subjects at home and we'll get together and do, robotics and drama. So pod schools, micro schools, charter schools, hybrid schools, that's the fastest growing thing happening in education in America. And it's starting to spread to other countries. And this is, of course, kind of blurring the line between homeschooling you are and homeschooling you're not. And even national organizations that serve homeschoolers have changed their definition of homeschoolers to accommodate some of the people that are in these new alternative situations.
So, as we see the rise of, hybrid schools and micro schools and, charter schools and all those different things, and as more people are, like IWs creating curriculum for specific things, and then other people are creating classical curriculum for other subjects, what are your hopes and in the future of homeschooling, say in like the next 10 to 20 years, what are your hopes as you're seeing all of these things start coming to life and growing? What are your hopes for education in general?
I would say my number one hope, and I believe this is happening and will continue to happen, and that is an increasing level of parental involvement in the education of children. One interesting statistic, and I don't have a source on this, but someone who I trust told me, so we'll assume that it's a true statement. It's reasonable to be true. If you look at public school kids and homeschool kids' test scores, homeschool kids always outperform public school kids. Okay, so that's a fact. Here's the interesting thing. If you strip out of the public school, kids who have two parents at home, and you compare those with homeschool kids, they're about the same.
Mm-hmm.
So the big difference is not necessarily being at home or being in a school. The big difference is, do you have two parents involved in your life, reading to you bedtime stories, helping you do your homework, holding you accountable, forming discipline habits that are going to carry you through into high school and college? The character side of it is probably bigger than the curriculum side of it, quite honestly. And that's one thing you see with charter schools, is you're much more likely to see parents who are very involved. And they could be single parents, that's possible, or divorced parents, but they're saying, we want to be involved enough in our kids' life to choose this school and support the school by helping the kids in an appropriate way and helping the school in an appropriate way. So I think what we're seeing with all of these trends, and what I hope we see more and more of, is this swing kind of back to parents feeling like it's on me. My kid's education is on me. And I will make the best choices I can, but I'm going to be involved no matter what I choose in helping them learn what they need to learn and be successful. Whereas I think for, the last 30, 40 years, and the schools to some degree have been complicit in this, the abdication of parents from that responsibility. Hey, I send the kid to school. They teach him all he needs to do, reading and writing and STEM and even in sports. I don't have to worry about that. And I think that's probably the biggest downward shift, in addition to the, addictions to technology and all that. So I'm hoping that we're seeing this shift back of parents saying, I'm going to control screens in my environment at home. I'm not going to give them unlimited access to entertainment and games. I'm going to create some structures in their life that will serve them well when discipline is required academically or professionally or relationship-wise later on. And I think there's a huge trend among young people, in their teens and 20s now, toward self-improvement, right? Self-development. Like, especially among men, there's this kind of whole subculture of men who are saying, hey, I want to be the best person I can be. I want to be mentally strong and physically strong and emotionally stable. I want to take care of myself. Those are the men and the women who hopefully will grow up and then have that culture that their children grew up in, that they didn't necessarily grow up in, or having to rediscover now in early adulthood or later adulthood too.
Yeah. So
do you see that at all in your peers? Guys about your age saying, hey, what can I do to be a better human being?
Yeah. No, yeah, definitely. Because I've seen it a lot as, kind of the people you hang out with. One of my friends, I've seen this huge transformation of, before his family came to our church and they went to another church, and it's very into video games and all of that stuff. Then they started coming to our church, started hanging out with different people, and there's just been this huge transformation. And it's it's so cool to see, what that can do. So as we wrap this interview up, NIW you did different short stories and Aesop's fables and things like that. What is your favorite book to read, whether it's for enjoyment or work, and then what is your favorite short story?
Well, it's kind of not a fair question. I would say that my favorite author for fiction is Tolstoy. And I think the best book he ever wrote was Anna Karenina. And this is the one novel I have read many times and will probably read many more times because I get more out of it each time. But I like his other stuff, and I like his short stories as well. I think a really interesting short story, and I taught this to a high school writing class and had them write about it, is a short story by Nathaniel Hawthorne called Bartleby the Scrivener. And it's just a super weird story where this guy, and his job is just copying stuff back in the 1800s. He's just a copy a scrivener. That's what they do, a clerk, he copies. And just one day he decides he doesn't want to do it anymore, so he doesn't. And his boss is like, you have to do this. And he says, I prefer not to. And then he says, well, you have to do it. And he says, I prefer not to. And he says, well, you have to leave then. And he says, I prefer not to. And he refuses to do anything. And it's kind of like this absurd expression of negative free will all the way to like a unknown disastrous end. And I don't know exactly what Melville was getting at, but every time I read the story, a different aspect of how do we as humans choose to do or choose to not do certain things. In particular, the things that we are required to do, and what are the consequences. And it's an exploration of, I think, almost the limits of free will. Like, you can free will yourself into an insane asylum if you want to, So I find that to be a very interesting story in terms of nonfiction, and that is the majority of my reading. So most of my reading is nonfiction. I like history, but I like history in the context of helping us understand the present a little bit more. So I think my favorite history book of all time is a book called Dominion by Tom Holland. It is a behemothing tome. He is a living author. He's an English author, and it is the history of the world from 500 BC up to the election of Donald Trump in the first election that he became president.
Wow.
And it's exploring all the ways in which Christianity has affected world history. And Tom Holland himself is not a professing Christian, but what's really interesting is to see the phenomenal positive impact that Christianity had. And sometimes not always a positive influence, but the lasting deep, the world just would not be anything at all like it is today without the birth of Jesus Christ and the growth of the church. And he starts, like I said, in ancient Babylon, and he ends in 2016.
Wow.
And so the scope of the book is just phenomenal. And, I guess I would finish by saying, I believe that if every high school student could read this book, and it's not a religious book, it's not professing that you should believe a certain thing or that any one thing is the truth. It's just saying, here's the facts about how Christianity affected culture, government, wars, peace, slavery, world society, technology, science. Like, we don't think about that. And I believe that if every high school student read this book, they would have a much better perspective on how we got to where we are, and maybe stop whining about some of the things they whine about today. Right? I mean, young people, not you, of course, but the ones that are all over TikTok, they have no concept of what it's like to live a hard life. Right? All you have to do is go back 2, 3, 500,000 years ago. Life was really hard for everyone. Even if you were wealthy, it was a lot harder then than it is for almost everyone today. And I think we need to keep in mind how phenomenally grateful we should be for the developments in politics and technology and religion and philosophy and all of the things that affect us today. So much of that positive stuff, it came from the influence of Christianity. And And rather than just railing against religion in general and Christianity in particular and against American slave owners and the founding of our country being based on inequality,
Yeah.
and how we just took advantage of the whole history of the world is everybody doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we blessed more than many people in the world? So that would be my recommendation for any high schoolers out there or young adults or old people like me. I listened to it a couple of years ago and I'm ready for another go around. Dominion by Tom Holland. So
Yeah.
there's my great fiction, my one short story, and the nonfiction of the decade.
Yeah. So you are very famous for your dad jokes. So would you be willing to share your favorite one or one before we end this?
Well, I'll give you a short one and a better one. Here's the kind of painful dad joke-ish one. Elijah, do you know what really makes my day?
No.
The rotation of the Earth.
Yeah, that's dad joke.
Yeah. Of course, you have to have a little bit of science knowledge to make that.
Yeah.
All right. Here's a language joke. So there's a wood chopper, a woodcutter out in the woods chopping down trees. And he's about to chop down a tree. And the tree shouts out, "Stop, stop, don't chop. I'm a talking tree." And the woodcutter thinks for a moment and says, "Yes, and you will die a log."
Oh, goodness. Well, I appreciate the dad jokes.
You're welcome.
I'm sure the audience will love the dad jokes.
We'll hope so.
Yeah.
And
So
I've got more jokes on YouTube. So if anyone wants to hear me tell more jokes, we've even got some illustrated jokes on YouTube.
Yes. So where can people find out more about you and your work?
IEW.com. Easy. 3-letter domain name. IEW Institute Excellence Writing.com. And that's got tons of stuff. Everything I do. I wrote a book called However Imperfectly, Lessons Learned from 30 Years of Teaching, which is a collection of about 50 essays I wrote over the last couple decades all put together. And then also you can search my name, Andrew Pudewa, on YouTube, and you can see all sorts of stuff there as well. And I have a podcast called the Arts of Language Podcast, and that is available on wherever you find your podcast.
Perfect. Well, once again, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Creator Corner.
It's been a pleasure. I hope you have great success with your endeavor here, Elijah. God bless you.
God bless you too.